I've clicked onto the Global Tropical Area for October the 10th, 2023. As is always the case in these videos, Athletics best your mind alone, and when making decisions ahead of any tropical cyclones, look towards your local weather office, local emergency management, and local tropical cyclone warning center. So there are two hurricanes, well, a hurricane and a typhoon that we're going to be talking about today. We've got Hurricane Lidia, that's on your screen now, and we've also got Typhoon Bolaven in the West Pacific. I'm going to be talking about Bolaven after Lidia, as Lidia is forecast to make landfall tonight, and I will leave a timestamp, so if you want to skip ahead to that section, you can. But this is Hurricane Lidia here on your screen. You can see the convection violently wrapping around the inner core. You can see it here, particularly I think it's around maybe 16 or 17 UTC on this loop, a very violent burst wrapping around. And this has been going through the jet interaction that we talked about yesterday, and you can see the upper level cirrus here over Mexico spreading away pretty quickly to the northeast away from Lidia. And we've seen some very significant intensification. This is some recon data that we got not too long ago. I'm going to reload this so we get the updated recon data. Here it is. And you can see the flight level wind peak on the first pass was around 110 knots, maybe a little bit higher than that. And looks like the secondary pass was just about the same in terms of wind speed on the first pass through the eye wall, with SFMRs about 100 to 110 knots overall. I think the max here was about 108 knots. And that is pretty good support for winds being at about 120 miles per hour. And I believe that is what the ATCF file has gone with. The National Hurricane Center on their intermediate advisory about 2 hours ago from when I'm recording this went about 100 knots or 115 miles per hour. And I think by the next advisory coming out in about an hour from now, they'll be going a little higher on that, maybe even upwards of 125 miles per hour if recon does find that. This has been very significant intensification. The pressure has fallen quite a bit as well, and I'm actually just going to check that we don't have another eye sonde. We do. You can see now, this was the old eye sonde. You can see we had a pressure of 954 millibars with the wind at the surface of about 19 knots. And the general rule of thumb is you subtract 1 millibar from the surface pressure for every 10 knots of wind. So with that, you would get a pressure of 952 millibars. This one looks to support about 950 millibars down at the surface. Very deep compared to yesterday. I think when I was recording my video yesterday, it was in the 980s, maybe upper 980s. And now we're in the low 950s, and this has been, over 30 millibars of pressure drop over the past 24 hours. And a lot of this has happened in the past 12 hours. Keep that in mind. This system has really ramped up very quickly, and that's what I said yesterday. Just because the system was not a hurricane yesterday at the time of my video, it didn't mean that the system couldn't quickly ramp up. And it certainly has, and now we've got a major hurricane on our doorstep here in Mexico. Now, this is a microwave pass we got earlier today. From what I know, there hasn't been a new one to come out, but we have recon data, so that's being good data for us to figure out the exact intensity. But you can see the eye wall was wrapping around the inner core earlier this morning. This was about 6:35 in the morning, I believe, local time, and I'm sure by now the eye has continued to get more well organized. Now, as the system comes towards the coastline, the system may weaken just a tad. Models have shown that the jet interaction will be peaking now, and it will be weakening a bit as we go towards landfall later this evening. And there might be some shear increasing, impacting the storm. Now, that weakening is not forecasted to be very significant at all. This forecast cone does show this being, I believe this forecast point might be 100 miles per hour. That, I think, will be, if there is a point offshore, that will probably be higher at landfall on their next advisory. This one was off the idea of this system not becoming a major hurricane. This was from a forecast earlier this morning when the forecast peak intensity was still at category 2, and now we've got a category 3 mid-grade at that from the recon data. So we're probably going to be looking at either a very high-end Cat 2 of about 110 miles per hour to a category 3 hurricane. Could be 115, could be 120. could be even higher if the system does intensify a little bit more, and depending on how impactful the shear may be as it comes through the coastline. You can see the hurricane warning in red here along the coastline, with tropical storm warnings surrounding that. And after landfall by tomorrow morning, the system is forecast to be a very weak tropical storm. A rapid degrading of the structure is forecast as the system interacts with a very high topography of Mexico, but the system won't be done overall with impacts. It, alongside a system in the Gulf of Mexico deemed Invest 93L, will be coming north here. And as Lidia comes over Mexico, or the remnants of it at least, we're going to be looking at a potential significant rainfall event, especially in the southeastern United States. This is the Weather Prediction Center rainfall outlook over the next 7 days. You can see there might be some heavy rainfall here across southern Texas and northeastern Mexico, especially with some of the high topography in northeastern Mexico. But the most significant rainfall overall over the next week is going to be here, generally in the region of New Orleans, east all the way into areas like Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, down the coast south of Cape Canaveral and near Tampa, Florida, in the Florida Peninsula. And you can see a lot of heavy rainfall here. You look at the legend here, this is over 2 inches over a pretty significant area of the southeast, with areas in between that could easily get higher totals, potentially upwards of 5, 6, maybe 7+ inches of rain. So make sure you stay tuned to your local National Weather Service office as this system, or it comes through, as these two systems rather come through. And I will leave links to the Weather Prediction Center and the National Weather Service in the description down below. All right, we're now going to move to the West Pacific as we have a significant typhoon to talk about. I'm going to reload this so we get the latest frames, and we're going to go quickly to radar, as we do still have that here from Guam. This is Typhoon Bolaven. This has been tracking northwest over the past day. Now, the Mariana Islands got very lucky with the system overall. Yesterday, the system had struggled quite a bit on approach. There seemed to be more shear, from what I could tell, more similar to what the European had showed, and that was impacting the system quite a bit. It was allowing, or not allowing rather, the convection to wrap around to the northern side, but also it looked like there may have been some dry air intrusions getting into the eye, and that really kept it at bay intensity-wise. Now, the shear has lowered, and it looks like it has mixed as dry air clearly, and you can see a much well-organized eye and eye wall structure with a very intense eye wall, at least from how high up we're looking at from the Guam radar. These are probably the last few frames, the last good frames that we're going to be seeing of this storm from Guam, but it's just truly amazing to look at. But thankfully, the storm was not as bad as it could have been across the Mariana Islands. We're going to go back to the infrared loop, and you can see the very cold cloud top surrounding it. Something that we do watch for with these stronger storms is how symmetric this CDO, or central dense overcast, gets. And you can see over the past several hours, this seems to be making an attempt to become more symmetric overall. And we're also seeing this eye in the center try to clear out more and more. And this will likely give us a pretty strong peak intensity. And this will be the first peak in all likelihood. You can see the eye clearing out there. And I think the current estimates from what I saw about an hour ago are about 105 knots. So it's about 120 miles per hour. Probably are higher by now. And I'd say this peak intensity will probably be in the category 4 range of about over 115 knots or 130 miles per hour. But it will be limited a little bit. Here's a microwave pass that we got earlier today. You can see that it had this strong inner core that we saw on Guam radar, but it also has this very strong band of convection that was wrapping around this inner core. It looks like this was in the phase of starting an eye wall replacement cycle, which, if you don't know what that means, the eye wall replacement cycle is basically where you have the inner core getting surrounded by a band of very strong thunderstorms like you see here in this microwave pass. Over time, the strongest winds of the hurricane, or typhoon in this case, will translate to this outer eye wall, and this inner core will degrade. So eventually you'll get this to degrade, and now you've just got this large secondary eye wall now becoming more dominant. Now, once this inner core degrades, this will begin to contract, and we'll have ourselves, once this contracts, a new eye wall. Now, typically the eye is typically larger in these cases after these replacement cycles, but of course you can have, through other impacts, the storm become even smaller in some cases. But the eyewall replacement cycle in general, it can be a little bit deceiving. It can be good because it does weaken the winds down for a time, but it does also, as the winds now translate to this now larger area of thunderstorms, it makes the wind field more broad overall, and it increases impacts of storm surge, the expansive winds, and it also increases surf impacts far away from the storm. And that will really be the main concern with the system in terms of any land impacts. We do still have some tropical storm force winds across the Mariana Islands, and this system is it's still pretty close to some of these islands in the northern part of the chain. And there might be some gusty winds along this chain as this system comes further north. But the main impact really will be higher surf, and this will be an impact not only for the Mariana Islands, but also west into areas like the Philippines, Taiwan, Japan, as the system turns north. Now, the general steering pattern remains the same. This subtropical ridge placed east of the system, north of the system right now, is going to be transitioning to a more east position, is what I'm trying to say there, of the system. And this will begin to pull the storm north, with this trough over Japan beginning to, with its flow, pull it north as well. And this will be sort of a funneling effect, getting the system to recurve into the open West Pacific. Now, the good news is here, I talked about a couple days ago that there could be some threat of some of these islands being hit. And this is part of the Mariana Island chain, but I forget what this island chain is called exactly. But the good news is the current forecast has the system making the gap between these two island chains. And let's hope that stays, because this system could be a very powerful typhoon by the time it comes through there. This is Thursday morning local time, and you can see our very strong typhoon with its jet interaction. And this in a millibar chart is just incredible to look at. Winds here at max aloft are 180 knots, it looks like there, maybe 190 knots. Very powerful jet, and this is one of the more favorable jet interactions that you'll ever see with a tropical cyclone, and this will likely allow it to intensify into a very significant super typhoon. Now, if I had to guess what's going to happen here in terms of the intensification times for the storm, I'd say we're going to get a peak intensity pretty shortly this morning local time, and that will probably be as a Cat 4 storm, a very strong typhoon. And then we're going to get some weakening as this eyewall replacement cycle takes shape. And that typically takes about a half a day to a day to complete. But after that does complete, the jet interaction should be in full swing, and we'll get our secondary peak. And then after that, it will continue to move pretty quickly further north, and we'll be looking at the system becoming a strong extratropical cyclone as it goes towards Alaska. Now, this is the Joint Typhoon Warning Center forecast cone. You can see the large tropical storm force wind field here, still impacting a large region across the Mariana Island chain. And you can see this general track that I talked about with this recurvature into the open Pacific east of Japan and racing off towards the northeast. If I'm completely honest, by Sunday, it will probably be a non-tropical cyclone by then, or at least it'll be very close to transitioning into a non-tropical cyclone, as storms typically do when they get this far north. But that's all that I've got for today. I'm going to be having continued videos this week on mainly Bolaven. The forecasting phase really of Lidia is done. I might touch on it tomorrow with the rainfall impacts in the U.S., but overall, this system's life is coming to an end. But stay safe in Mexico as the system comes through, and stay safe in the islands of the Mariana Islands as Bolaven continues to move away from the region. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching.